A Red Scare is the promotion of fear of a potential rise of communism or radical leftism, used by anti-leftist proponents. In the United States, the first Red Scare was about worker revolution and political radicalism. The second Red Scare was focused on national and foreign communists influencing society, infiltrating the federal government, or both. First Red Scare. The first Red Scare began following the Bolshevik Russian Revolution of 1917 and the intensely patriotic years of World War I as anarchist and left-wing social agitation aggravated national, social, and political tensions. Political scientist, and former member of the Communist Party, Murray B. Levin wrote that the Red Scare was a nationwide anti-radical hysteria provoked by a mounting fear and anxiety that a Bolshevik revolution in America was imminent, a revolution that would change church, home, marriage, civility, and the American way of life. Newspapers exacerbated those political fears into xenophobia because varieties of radical anarchism were becoming popular as possible solutions to poverty, often by recent European immigrants. When the industrial workers of the world backed several labor strikes in 1916 and 1917, the press portrayed them as radical threats to American society inspired by left-wing, foreign agents provocateurs. Those on the side of the IWW claimed that the press misrepresented legitimate labor strikes as crimes against society, conspiracies against the government, and plots to establish communism. Opponents, on the other hand, see these as an extension of the radical, anti-capitalist foundations of the IWW, which contends that all workers should be united as a social class and that capitalism and the wage system should be abolished. In April 1919, authorities discovered a plot for mailing 36 bombs to prominent members of the U.S. political and economic establishment, J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, U.S. Attorney General Alexander Mitchell Palmer, and immigration officials. On June 2, 1919, in 8 cities, 8 bombs simultaneously exploded. One target was the Washington, D.C., house of U.S. Attorney General Palmer, where the explosion killed the bomber, who evidence indicated was an Italian-American radical from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Afterwards, Palmer ordered the U.S. Justice Department to launch the Palmer raids. Yet, in 1918, before the bombings, President Woodrow Wilson had pressured the Congress to legislate the Anti-Immigrant, Anti-Anarchist Sedition Act of 1918 to protect wartime morale by deporting putatively undesirable political people. Law professor David D. Cole reports that President Wilson unregistered trademark S. federal government consistently targeted alien radicals, deporting them for their speech or associations, making little effort to distinguish true threats from ideological dissidents. Initially, the press praised the raids. The Washington Post said, "There is no time to waste on hair-splitting over the infringement of liberty," and the New York Times said the injuries inflicted upon the arrested were souvenirs of the new attitude of aggressiveness which had been assumed by the federal agents against Reds and suspected Reds. In the event, the Palmer raids were criticized as unconstitutional by 12 publicly prominent lawyers, including Felix Frankfurter, who published a report on the illegal practices of the United States Department of Justice, documenting systematic violations of the Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendments to the U.S. Constitution via Palmer authorized a acts and a wanton violence. Defensively, Palmer then warned that a government-deposing left-wing revolution would begin on May 1, 1920 May Day, the International Workers' Unregistered Trademark Day. When it failed to happen, he was ridiculed and lost much credibility. Strengthening the legal criticism of Palmer was that fewer than 600 deportations were substantiated with evidence, out of the thousands of resident aliens illegally arrested and deported. In July 1920, Palmer unregistered trademark S promising Democratic Party bid for the U.S. presidency failed. Wall Street was bombed on September 1, 1920, near Federal Hall and the J.P. Morgan Bank. Although both anarchists and communists were suspected as being responsible for the bombing, ultimately no individuals were indicted for the bombing, in which 38 died and 141 were injured. In 1919 €20 several states enacted criminal syndicalism laws outlawing advocacy of violence in effecting and securing social change. The restrictions included free speech limitations. Passage of these laws, in turn, provoked aggressive police investigation of the accused persons, their jailing, and deportation for being suspected of being either communist or left-wing. Regardless of ideological gradation, the Red Scare did not distinguish between communism, anarchism, socialism, or social democracy. Second Red Scare. The Second Red Scare occurred after World War II, and was popularly known as McCarthyism after its most famous supporter, Senator Joseph McCarthy. McCarthyism coincided with increased popular fear of communist espionage consequent to a Soviet Eastern Europe, the Berlin blockade, the Chinese Civil War, the confessions of spying for the Soviet Union given by several high-ranking U.S. government officials, and the Korean War. Internal causes of communist fear. The events of the late 1940s are the trial of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, the Iron Curtain around Eastern Europe, and the Soviet Union unregistered trademark as nuclear weapon surprised the American public, influencing popular opinion about U.S. national security, that, in turn, connected to fear of the Soviet Union hydrogen bombing the United States, and fear of the Communist Party of the United States of America. In Canada, the 1946 Kelleher Taschereau Commission investigated espionage after top-secret documents concerning RDX, radar and other weapons were handed over to the Soviets by a domestic spy ring. At the House Un-American Activities Committee, former CPUSA members and NKVD spies, Elizabeth Bentley and Whittaker Chambers, testified that Soviet spies and communist sympathizers had penetrated the U.S. government before, during and after World War II. Other U.S. citizen spies confessed, some with pride, to their acts of espionage in situations where the statute of limitations on prosecuting them had run out. In 1949, anti-Euro-communist fear, and fear of American traitors, was aggravated by the Chinese Communists winning the Chinese Civil War against the Western-sponsored Kuomintang, their founding of the People's Republic of China, and later Chinese intervention in the Korean War against U.S. ally South Korea. A few of the events during the Red Scare were also due to a power struggle between J. Edgar Hoover and the Central Intelligence Agency. Hoover had instigated and aided some of the investigations of members of the CIA with leftist history, like Cord Meyer. This conflict could also be traced back to the conflict between Hoover and William J. Donovan, going back to the first Red Scare, but especially during World War II. Donovan ran the OSS. They had differing opinions on the nature of the alliance with the Soviet Union, conflicts over jurisdiction, conflicts of personality, the OSS hiring of communists and criminals as agents, etc. History. By the 1930s, communism had become an attractive economic ideology among some in the United States, particularly among labor leaders and the intelligentsia. At its zenith in 1939, the CPUSA had some 50,000 members. In 1940, soon after World War II began in Europe, the U.S. Congress legislated the Alien Registration Act, making it a crime to knowingly or willfully advocate, abet, advise or teach the duty, necessity, desirability or propriety of overthrowing the government of the United States or of any state by force or violence, or for anyone to organize any association which teaches, advises or encourages such an overthrow, or for anyone to become a member of or to affiliate with any such association and required federal registration of all foreign nationals. Although principally deployed against communists, the Smith Act was also used against right-wing political threats such as the German-American Bund, and the perceived racial disloyalty of the Japanese-American population. In 1941, after Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, the CPUSA's official position became pro-war, opposing labor strikes in the weapons industry and supporting the U.S. war effort against the Axis powers. With the slogan "Communism as 20th-century Americanism," the chairman, Earl Browder, advertised the CPUSA's integration to the political mainstream. In contrast, the Trotskyist Socialist Workers' Party opposed U.S. participation in the war and supported labor strikes, even in the war effort industry. For this reason, James P. Cannon and other SWP leaders were convicted per the Smith Act. In March 1947, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9835, creating the Federal Employees Loyalty Program, establishing political loyalty review boards who determined the Americanism of federal government employees, and recommended termination of those who had confessed to spying for the Soviet Union, as well as some suspected of being un-American. It also was the template for several state legislatures' loyalty acts, such as California's Levering Act. The House Committee on Un-American Activities and the committees of Senator Joseph McCarthy conducted character investigations of American communists, and their roles in espionage, propaganda, and subversion favoring the Soviet Union in the process, revealing the extraordinary breadth of the Soviet spy network in infiltrating the federal government. The process also launched the successful political career of Richard Nixon, and Robert F. Kennedy, as well as that of Joseph McCarthy. McCarthy, a freshman senator who died soon thereafter, realized little political gain from the process. Senator McCarran introduced the McCarran Internal Security Act of 1950 that was passed by the U.S. Congress and which modified a great deal of law to restrict civil liberties in the name of security. President Truman declared the act a mockery of the Bill of Rights, and a long step toward totalitarianism, because it represented a government restriction on the freedom of opinion. He vetoed the act, but his veto was overturned by Congress. Much of the bill eventually was repealed. The Second Red Scare profoundly altered the temper of American society. Its later characterization as anti-intellectual may be seen as contributory to the popularity of anti-communist espionage and science fiction movies with stories and themes of the infiltration, subversion, invasion, and destruction of American society by Euro-American thought and inhuman beings. Even a baseball team, the Cincinnati Reds, temporarily renamed themselves the Cincinnati Redlegs to avoid the money-losing and career-ruining connotations inherent in being ball-playing Reds. In 1995, the American government revealed details of the VNONA project indicating intelligence gathering by Americans for the Soviet Union from 1940 through 1980. See also: American social policy during the Second Red Scare, Foley Square Trial, History of Soviet espionage in the United States, Hollywood Blacklist, Jenks Act, Jenks v. United States, Keloka Euro-Taschereau Commission, Lavender Scare, Subversive Activities Control Board, The Red Decade, Espionage Act of 1917, Eugene Debs and Debs v. United States, The Cold War, The Reagan Doctrine, U.S. Intervention in Latin America, Church Committee, Propaganda in the United States and Government Propaganda in the United States, Psychological Operations, Pentagon Military Analyst Program, The Crucible, Witch Hunt, Ruggevar, Footnotes. References and further reading: K. A. Cordileone, The Torment of Secrecy, Reckoning with Communism and Anti-Communism After VNONA, Diplomatic History, Volume 35, No. 4, ppA 615 642. Albert Fried, McCarthyism, The Great American Red Scare, A Documentary History. New York, Oxford University Press, 1997. Joy Hakim, War, Peace, and All That Jazz. New York, Oxford University Press, 1995. John Earl Haynes, Red Scare or Red Menace? American Communism and Anti-Communism in the Cold War Era. Ivan Adi, 2000. John Earl Haynes and Harvey Klew, VNONA, Decoding Soviet Espionage in America. Cambridge, Massachusetts, Yale University Press, 2000. Murray B. Levin, Political Hysteria in America, The Democratic Capacity for Repression. New York, Basic Books, 1972. Roger McDaniel, Dying for Joe McCarthy's Sins. Cody, Wyoming Wordsworth, 2013. ISBN 978-0983027591, Ted Morgan, Reds, McCarthyism in 20th Century America. New York, Random House, 2004. Robert K. Murray, Red Scare: A Study in National Hysteria, 1919–1920. New York, McGraw-Hill Education, 1964. Richard Gid Powers, Not Without Honor, A History of American Anti-Communism. New York, Free Press, 1997. Ellen Schrecker, Many Other Crimes, McCarthyism in America. Boston, Little, Brown, 1998. Landon R. Y. Stalls, The Second Red Scare and the Unmaking of the New Deal Left. Princeton, New Jersey, Princeton University Press, 2012. William M. Weisk, The Legal Foundations of Domestic Anti-Communism, The Background of Dennis v. United States, Supreme Court Review, Volume 2001, ppA 375 a 434. In JSTOR, External Links, Political Tests for Professors, Academic Freedom During the McCarthy Years by Ellen Schrecker, The University Loyalty Oath, October 7, 1999.